Hello and welcome back to PA Chalk Up. I'm your host Manny, and today we have Peter Kenn. How are we doing?
Doing great. Excited to be here. Can't wait to get into it.
Love it. Again, we previously had on Kenna Smoke who recommended you, so then I reached out straight away. I know it's been a little bit in the making, but you're finally
Yeah,
here.
we're here. We made it. Ken is awesome. Yeah, I can't wait to get into it. Let's get going.
Love it. So if you just start us off with a little background on how you got started in the industry. Obviously, people may know some of your background, but if you
Sure.
give us a little highlight.
Yeah. I guess the quickest way to put it is my dad was a strength coach for a really long time at some pretty major universities and in the NFL. I sort of fell in love with that process going into my senior year of high school, decided that I wanted to be a strength and conditioning coach and went to Appalachian State, which is, in my opinion, one of the better strength and conditioning programs for undergrad and graduate school in the country. Luckily, was able to do track and field there as well. So I spent 5 years there getting my undergrad and master's, and then I transferred to Iowa State, finished my college career out as a student athlete there, and then also got a second master's, and then started my first job at Army. And then a year later, I was at SMU kind of running things. So on the Olympic side, it's been really quick, really fast journey, pretty awesome, fortunate and lucky in some instances, working really hard in others. And so, yeah, that's the short, sweet to it, and going into year 4 here. So been a short but very intense ride.
What gets you currently fired up in the industry?
Ooh, in the industry. I think that, we're starting to realize kind of where this thing needs to go. I've heard a few coaches talk about really how it's interesting how young our profession is in the sense of where other professions really lie from a timeline of when the invention of this as a kind of full-time profession really started. It's not that long ago in the grand scheme of things. And so for us to really start to push into what it means to be accredited, what it means to be certified, what it means for institutions, how we're connecting globally, I think is really awesome to be a part of in this current timeline of where things are moving. So ultimately, I just think it's pretty niche on our end of we're trying to find ways to collaborate more and more. I think it used to be very, don't ask me what I'm doing. These are my secrets. I'm trying to protect this and make the best program I can. I don't want anyone else around me. Whereas, in my experience recently, there's a lot more collaboration between coaches, even within conference. And so that's what I'm excited about. I could really, Kasky on our end is cool and all that. And I'm sure the CSCCA is doing some things on their end to continue to make a more rigorous certification. But at the end of the day, I think the collaboration that we're seeing currently is both at an all-time high and also probably more separated than it's ever been. So while that doesn't make a lot of sense, I think we're moving in the right direction.
100%. And I kind of like what you said there with the terms of gatekeeping and how that's slowly shifting. It doesn't happen everywhere. Predominantly, most of it happens in the US, which a lot of the guests that I have on are from the US. But you are starting to slowly see this shift of, okay, it's actually not everyone's after my job, so I can speak about it. And
Sure.
even so, when I was at UW, Ben Creamer, who was the sports scientist there, like he posted a lot of his work, and I walked up to him once when he was doing it, and I was like, "You post a lot of it. Like, are you not scared that people take it and run with it?" He was like, "Not really, because no one's going to be able to do it like I do it. Like,
Right.
I invented it, I made it into what it is. No one's going to copy what I do."
Yeah, I think that's a large sentiment that a lot of people are feeling right now. I think early on, there was a lot of sharing, and then it quickly became no sharing. And I think we're sort of getting back to that. So that's probably the most exciting part for me in terms of the development of where everything's going. And like you said, you should really feel like you're the best at what you do. And even if someone tried to copy you, they couldn't do it. So I think that's a great mindset for every coach to have.
100%. In terms of like the Olympic side, what teams are you currently like managing and programming, and how does it change between all your different teams?
Yeah, so my direct oversight, right? Like I lead our department, so I have a number of assistants that work with me, and they'll cover some teams. But my direct teams are men's soccer, women's soccer, men's swimming, and then our jumpers and sprinters on the track sides. I made it pretty clear early on that I wanted to have an equal number of men's and women's teams. And I did track in college, so I always got to keep track. I have a special affinity towards them, but we have honestly really great groups all around. Everyone that comes into our weight room is fantastic. Obviously, we will shift around what that programming looks like depending on certain teams and what the yearly schedule looks like from a competition aspect, from a compliance aspect, and all those different things. But ultimately, we have some pretty big differences in how we're training students. I would say overall, my ideology is a tier system ideology, and that's partly because that's where really what I grew up around. But after my studies and what I've seen as a professional, it just happens to be what works best for me. And that ultimately led me to continue to push into those aspects. And I do things differently than a traditional tier system model in terms of how I'll switch my days up for different sports depending on time of year. And also depending on how number of times a week we're training, so 3 versus 2. And if we were taking an off day, what does that look like? But yeah, I would say a lot of my time is spent with the soccer programs right now because they're in season. And so trying to help manage a lot of that workload and even player load and things like that with our sports scientists to create the most advantageous program possible is what's taking up a considerable amount of time. But our men's swim program just started back up as well, and they're really getting after it. We're kind of in their building phase is what we like to call it before some of the first meets start to happen. And then our track and field team obviously has a little bit of time left before things start going. So we're really just in the baseline build phase for them.
You said something that I'm not quite sure what it means. Like, I think
Okay.
it's something like soccer. What's that?
Sorry, football.
It's a current joke in the podcast.
No, I love it. I love it.
No, so obviously with the tier system, there's a lot of going on, and I'm guessing that from what you've learned, you're sort of taking stuff and different principles and adapting it to fit what each sport is sort of chasing for that season.
Yeah, I mean, the tier system in its essence, the way I understand it, and I shouldn't be wrong about this, it's essentially a management style. It is not telling you what to program and where to program it. It's more telling you what the days and alignment of how those movements should look. And so it really stems from an entire holistic athletic-based training model, right, where you have total-based movements, lower-based movements, and upper-based movements. Those rotate on a 3-day model. So if your first day was 3 blocks of movements, which mine usually are more, but if it was only 3 blocks, you do a total block, a lower block, and an upper block. And then that would rotate to your day 2, which would be a lower block, an upper block, and a total. And then the last block would be starting with upper, then total, and lower. And so when you have that kind of rotating trifecta, you're really hitting each body part or each movement group with the same emphasis throughout the week. And it's not split into upper and lower for a variety of reasons. One, the tier system kind of goes off the basis that a sport is played with your whole body. So we need to train the whole body all the time. I think that is an important part of not only physiological development, but also energy system development in the sense of how we're trying to use it from a speed aspect within the weight room and what our tempo looks like, especially for specific sports. And we'll adjust that tempo accordingly, right? Like our jumpers who may only have 3 attempts to meet with quite a long time in between those attempts is not going to need to work at as high of a pace within the weight room as our soccer teams will, frankly, just because that is for us, our 90-minute players are going 45 minutes a half and they're not coming out, right? So we need them to be adapted to that from a conditioning sense and a metabolic sense just as much as we need them to from a physiological sense. And so the tier system really allows us to take that layout and plug in different movements that we think align best with what we're trying to accomplish, which is obviously to be fit, to have power towards the end of games, to be physically strong, both upper and lower, to maintain the contact that happens within the sport. And so that's what we're going to do. And that it's really that simple when you look at it. But yeah, programming wise, I have my own styles of doing things. We'll do ascending loads. We'll do base loads across the board, whether it's one maintained set of 5x4 at 76, or we're ascending through 5 sets, or maybe even 4 sets, 6 sets. Could be whatever it want, right? So ultimately, pretty cool work that we're doing here. We'll even throw in some French contrast between some sets every now and then. So really, I think of it as true base management. It's just managing what you want to put into it. And so it happens to work really well for us.
100%. And one of the things I love most about the tier system, so I kind of do what you're talking about, like I mix and match a couple different styles to come out with so again, in essence, the tier system's looking at rounding off athletes, making them balanced. However many pushes, there's a ratio for pushes and pulls. Like all this stuff sort of builds out this ecosystem within their body that okay, I am just as strong pushing as I am pulling. And then when you add stuff in like French contrast, flexible nonlinear, it kind of creates this hybrid thing where you're you've got an answer for everything. And it's actually funny you're saying this. So yesterday, I mentioned to you that I was at the UKSEA event, and I was speaking with Paul Comfort, and we were talking about like what does national averages mean, like what like national standards, we'll say. So like if you're soccer, your sprint speeds are like whatever they are. I'm not going to make stats just now. Like it's a standard for positional demands. What we were talking about was essentially that's just an average for the whole nation. But like if you're below it, yeah, sure, meet it. But it just means you're average if you get there. So like how and what can we do to then get you better than the averages? Because we don't want to be average, we want to be better. Um, how do you? What's your take on that? This is a quick shout out to our main sponsor on this channel, TeamBuildr. TeamBuildr is all-in-one platform that hosts programs, questionnaires, testing, anything that you may need for your athlete's performance. You can host it in TeamBuildr. TeamBuildr also now has two different sides, which is OS and Practice. For more information on TeamBuildr, check out the link in the description. And if you use code PACHOCKUP all together, you will get a 30-day free trial. Our next sponsor is Apex Cool Labs. Apex Cool Labs is a palm cooling device that helps you gain further performance by cooling and aids the recovery so you can perform more for longer. To check out what Apex Cool Labs have, there's a link in the description.
Well, this is going to sound probably pretty American. The only KPI that really matters to me is wins. And so I could care less if you're below our average if we're winning games, right? Like that's how I really see it. I have to develop athletes around the talent and the physical capabilities that they have. But at the end of the day, if you are winning games, that is the most important metric that I'm probably being judged off of. And while we will utilize certain metrics from that perspective, right? Like we're tracking jump heights, we're tracking hamstring strength, we're tracking total yardage, we're looking at sprint speeds. We're always trying to improve those aspects of the game. But at the end of the day, the tactical and technical ability can far outweigh a lot of what that does. And ultimately that comes down to the coaching staffs themselves and what they're able to implement at practice and help develop from a player base. It's my job to create the most athletic student athlete that I can bring to the table so the coaches can use that athleticism and adapt it to whatever their play style is and their scheme is. But yeah, I mean, look, those things are important. I'm not going to lie and say we don't look at them, and we are trying to improve them, but I could care less if we're below the average if we're winning. And now when you're not winning, that's a problem.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is a fine line to say, I think, that particular statement. But at the end of the day, as long as we're constantly improving and we are doing benchmarking and referring to that benchmarking and then also retesting throughout the year to create a progressive measure, I think that's probably the best thing that you can do. At the end of the day, I think of it a lot like a track person. Obviously, I did track is if you can PR every day, that's really, really hard to do. But if you can do that, you're going to be pretty great at some point. And so we kind of come in with that mentality in terms of what we're trying to do and what we implement within a practice procedure or within a warm-up procedure or within the lift or within a conditioning session or a speed session or an agility session. Everything we do is geared towards having some type of PR that day so that we can continue to build on our foundational basis.
What is your strategy to develop these KPIs and qualities in the gym and outside the gym? Obviously, you spoke about the tier system for the gym, but how are you using different models to sort of program and phase out the in pitch and the gym side?
Yeah, so I mean, it really starts with tracking some of those numbers. And so for us, jump height is kind of what we're using as our major power output, right? So if that's going to be one of our most consistent tests within the weight room setting in terms of how we are measuring what that looks like, we do it in two different ways. We have an in-season model and an out-of-season model. Our in-season model is more geared towards fatigue in a sense of we will jump every lift, pre-lift. And if we're within outside of one standard deviation of our average jump height, we'll assume that there's some type of either acute or chronic fatigue happening with our students. And so we'll adjust our volume accordingly. But we're still utilizing that data as a performance metric as well. So a lot of what we do is utilize power-based movements at the beginning and the end of our training sessions. And so some of that is I really believe that power has to be utilized under fatigue because it is going to be utilized under fatigue when they're playing. And so we will have loaded and unloaded plyometrics heavily utilized throughout the entire session in a sense. So if I'm starting on a day one where tier one is a total based movement and my tier four would then be another total, we're going to do that and we're going to make it almost a longer base plyometric, whether it's a low level plyometric that's not at 100% intensity or on 100% maximal plyometric effort, it will be for multiple reps at that fatigue level. And so we found that that's actually aided quite a bit in our power development and what we're able to produce, especially because the fatigue throughout the season continues to accumulate. The more that we can produce power under accumulated fatigue, we're going to see some physiological adaptation, but also the confidence within our student athletes that they're able to produce that power when they need to. And so I think that's been fundamental in addressing some of those power gaps that we may have seen previously, in that we've had a number of student athletes continue to jump higher and higher every week, even under what I would consider short-term chronic fatigue, in the sense we're playing 2 games a week with a significant amount of practice load. Now in the off season, that's a little bit different. We don't use a fatigue metric at all, really. I mean, occasionally we will, depending on where we're at. But I see the off season as you should be tired, we should be fatigued. And so if our jump height's a little bit lower, it's not necessarily an indicator that I'm going to adjust the training load. I may, depending on the circumstance, but ultimately we push really, really hard in terms of our volume and intensity in the off season. And so we're expecting to see some jump heights kind of decrease. However, if we're coming off of a deload week going into a super load week and we jump before we train, and we just came off of a period where we decrease our volume and intensity, we're expecting to see that jump height go up. And I would say we're on probably a 90% hit rate for that. The other 10% can be chalked up to any number of extraneous variables that may be occurring. And it could also just be that our training program didn't work for that individual. So we will go back and evaluate those things to see if we missed, or we'll have conversations with our athletes. We do a lot of wellness tracking and RPE tracking based on training sessions to see kind of where their feel is. And so we have a lot of different moving parts from a sports science side that allow us to make some modifications, but that's kind of our weight room basis. We also will do benchmark testing at the beginning of the fall and spring semesters for us as a guideline for where the rest of the semester will look. And so that is RSI 10.5, horseplate, counter movement jump, and the NOR board. And so we're getting some baseline metrics on that allow us to adjust our training protocols. But ultimately, we're seeing those from a semester to semester, more of a long-term testing protocol to see what our training's actually producing. On the field, things are significantly different. We are of the belief that we need to hit 90% of our max sprint speed every 7 days. And so if that doesn't happen, we will make sure it happens, whether in a practice setting or in a speed session. And we break our field-based work from a strength conditioning perspective into 3 different groups. We have a true linear speed day. And so we will work through linear speed through a number of different starting positions that ultimately accumulate to various distances and loads. And we'll typically build that throughout the off season, starting at 10 to 15 yards of maximal acceleration work, because I wouldn't call that top speed, but kind of starting through linear acceleration, working all the way to top end speed, which for us usually occurs around that 30 to 35 meter mark. And then our agility is a true agility session where we're reacting to stimulus. And we will actually adjust that from a change of direction to agility over the course of 4 weeks, where we give them the pattern early on so that we can develop some of the tissue growth and support that we need so that they can handle the movements we're asking them to do. And then we'll add in some stimulus-based reactions so that they can begin to work into more of what a game-like setting would be. And then we also have conditioning sessions, and those conditioning sessions are entirely based off of what game load would be. So what we do is we look at kind of average distance by position group, if you will, for a game, and then we will essentially build into it the same way we would if we were working to a max. We'll go 70% of that volume in our week 1, 80% in our week 2, 90% in our week 3, and then we're going to hover around and probably maintain around that 90% protocol for a while, just because they have practice on top of things. And so we're looking at what practice yardage is, what our conditioning based yardage is, and trying to find a way to, if we can, overextend on that yardage preseason, so that when we get into season, any type of yardage that they accumulate in game will be easier than what it was in the preseason. And so we do a lot of different things, test a lot of different pieces, but it really is, at the end of the day, it's a constant evaluation on day-to-day feedback. We allow our athletes to have autonomy in some of the movements they choose. So for instance, our first block is either a clean paired with some type of med ball throw, toss, or slam, or it is a loaded dumbbell jump, whether in a split stance position, a double leg position, a single leg position, paired with an eccentric loaded kind of plyometric drop, if you will. So similar to a depth jump, but we do a lot of dumbbell loaded drops into a stick. And so we'll have a massive concentric follow with a massive eccentric if they're not looking to clean. And so we give our athletes the autonomy to really decide what they want to do and what makes them feel best. And we've seen that have significant success in a lot of those outputs and KPIs as well.
Nice. So just for your peace of mind, I've not forgotten anything. I always make notes. I actually wanted to go back into the conditioning speeds and how you meet the demands of the sport, and then how you sort of develop that a little bit. You kind of mentioned that obviously your speeds and your conditioning, you're kind of targeting towards a game and how they pace out their games. Obviously, you'll have more attactive phases, you'll have more defensive phases. Within that, obviously, you kind of mentioned that all you care about is the wins and losses, but you are driving some standards there. How do you sort of get to those standards that you sort of already set? Obviously, this is your, I think you said third or fourth year?
Yeah, going into year 4. Yeah.
Yeah, going into year 4. So obviously, you've already got a background of data that you can be like, okay, this is where we were last year, this is where we need to be this year. How are you sort of developing these qualities to match your
Yeah. Yeah.
playing styles?
Great question. We utilize the 3015 IFT, right?
Yeah.
And that's our base testing for one of our teams. Our other team utilizes a Nike Spark Yo-Yo. So both intermittent in quality and how we're really attacking what we're doing. Essentially, the way I view it, right, and how we play here is it's all oxidative energy system, but it's all intermittent based.
Peter, I'm so fucking glad you said it that way. Fucking drives me insane, all these different energy systems.
Yeah, I mean
Oxygen drives it.
it's long form based conditioning. Whether we're walking or running, it's constant movement for the entire time. I do think obviously there's some power output where we maybe have some of those faster systems working in unison, right? They're not mutually exclusive, but at the end of the day, it's long form conditioning. The way that we break it out now, it is intermittent in fashion. So we utilize 2 tests based on what our coaches like better. And so one group uses the yo-yo, one group uses the 3015. So based on what those standards are, and so for example, one of our team that uses the 3015, our standards are pretty vigorous in the sense of we went back and looked through a number of different 3015 I guess research to figure out what the national standards were for various different clubs and groups, and for women athletes and male athletes. So really our standards lie at for us 19 is our kind of bronze level standard, if you will, of what we want to maintain as a minimum. We called 20 our silver and 20.5 our gold, which are obviously pretty hard standards to meet. But then on our yo-yo side of things, we're trying to push into that 56 level. If you're not there, we probably have some work to do, but ultimately our training reflects that. So from a conditioning aspect, what we will do is both days are intermittent, but one day is essentially only linear work with minimal cutting, and the other day has significant cutting. And so what that'll look like is from the 30 side of things, where there's a number of different, I guess, tools you can utilize online to determine what the yardage should be for a person specific score. We will break our group up within those scores of what they actually attained on that test, and we'll do a pre-test and a final test. So our pre-test is in our first week of training, and our final test is right before kind of our season actually starts. So one, we like to do it with no coaches around to start, so that student athletes don't feel any type of kind of pressure within that system, so they can just go out and learn the test, especially for incomers who may have never done it before. It's a really important part of the learning process for them to, one, understand what the test actually feels like and looks like before they do it. And then when we actually test, obviously they're now acclimated to what that system looks like. But on our conditioning days, of the 2 that we have in our preseason, one will be fully based off that 30-15 yardage, but it's all long form. And so a lot of that will be a 1-to-1 work rest ratio, in which we're, if we're going for 10 or 12, 15 seconds, whatever that distance is, they'll then have that same turnaround time and come back. And they're usually, we're working in a sets and reps basis. So we may do like 2 sets of 8 or 3 sets of 8 as we progress at a specific yardage. That's really only a 5 to 10 yard difference per rep for each individual based on where their score lies. And then the other phase of that is we kind of take the average group score for our change of direction kind of conditioning, if you will. And so that'll be based on the same yardage that we need from the 30-15, but it'll include cutting. And so our times and durations will be a little bit longer, and it'll be more of a shuttle system where we'll kind of have one group go, and while they're going, the other group's resting. And then when that group's done, they'll go again. And so we do incorporate active rest within that as well. We do like our student athletes to walk around in between those reps. And we think that provides the best kind of overlay of what it's actually like to be in game. You're going to be walking, and you're going to be sprinting, and sometimes you're going to be jogging, and sometimes we're going to be cutting. So we try to train the same way that we see them play in game. What that looks like differently from the yo-yo perspective is obviously The yo-yo has a little bit more cutting, I think, if you kind of time it out. It's a little bit shorter as well in terms of duration. And so very similar conditioning days, but the way that that particular team's play style is, we will do a little bit significantly longer form running, in the sense that we're not utilizing the yo-yo to determine our yardage, but we will do more time-based intermittent work. And so that will look like for us about a 7-minute mile pace for a duration of distance. And so we say, hey, this is our minimum distance requirement. If we can go beyond that, we obviously want to, so we can build upon this capacity. But I think for us, I mean, I'm going to use Imperial for now. We were doing 8 laps around a track, and then like 1.2 laps around a track, and then 0.6 laps around a track distance wise. You can calculate that out. I don't remember it exactly off the top of my head, but it was essentially those 3 lines where we were saying, hey, you have X amount of time to do 1.8 laps, X amount of time to do 1.2, and then X amount of time to do 0.6. And again, that was roughly a 7-minute mile pace. And so that also included a fairly short turnaround of 45 seconds to a minute and a half recovery time, but an active walk before they had to get back to their next start position to continue. And so we try to use that active recovery in encompassing with really, really high intensity movements, and also just particularly difficult conditioning measures as a whole. But that group that's utilizing yo-yo will also do a significant amount of cutting work. And all that yardage, again, is based around what's happening at practice at night from a captain's practice perspective, or if we are not in a voluntary time period, what does the coach's practice actually look like, and how much distance are we accumulating? If we can create a conditioning protocol, well, let's say, for instance, an average game on the women's side may be anywhere from 7,500 yards to 10,000 yards for most of our players. We're going to take kind of that median yardage for us, so around that 8,000 to 9,000 mark, and say, okay, if they accomplish 6,000 yards of practice, we only maybe need to add in 2,000 to 2,500 yards within our conditioning sessions to meet that baseline. And so we really try and work off what those numbers are to create a system where all of our athletes are adequately prepared. And so obviously we have some low minute players as well that may not accumulate that same yardage. And so we'll see what the average yardage is for someone who's accumulating 20 minutes of work, and then say, hey, this person probably needs some more conditioning to keep them at the same baseline, because at any point they could go in. And so we need to make sure everyone's prepared for a 90-minute game. So that's really long answer how our conditioning works. A lot of oxidative base. We take care of the other pieces within the weight room and in our sprint sessions. Our sprint sessions, which I didn't give a lot of context to, again, we're really centered around trying to reach that 90% threshold of our top speed. And if our speed increases, which we've seen, I think, a number of individuals on our women's side increase in total speed this year from a max effort standpoint, what we will do is, again, gradually work to that from a yardage perspective, but the intensity remains the same. We do a lot of competition-based sprinting so that there is a need to push as hard as you can. But essentially, if we're not preparing the hamstring to work at a maximal load, when we get into game and they're working at a maximal load, it won't be prepared for that. And so we're really geared around the technical aspects of our linear speed. We'll start from traditional split stance to opposite leg dominant split stance to tall falling movements to half kneeling movements to lateral half kneeling movements to lateral starts to reverse starts. We'll do any number of starting position within our speed work. So, because that's just how game works. You may be facing backwards when you need to turn and open the hip all the way to get into a maximal acceleration to a top end sprint. And so we work through all those different positions in our speed. And then our our agility really focuses on some specific movement patterns that we see within the game, whether it's a reverse lateral shuffle to a hip open up either to the dominant side or non-dominant side. So we do a lot of different movement patterns that we think address the overall needs.
Yeah. So I'm going to come back to the speed and the agility and some of the fatigue stuff that you were talking about. But I want to take like a side step just now. And how does this conditioning style standard and protocols kind of match up with the swimming? Obviously they're non-land based, but they will still have land based sessions. How does that change in terms of conditioning?
For swim, everything's way different. Everything on the field does not happen with the swim program. The swim program for us is, we have a coach I work really well with, but essentially our ideology is, because of how specific that output is from a conditioning kind of basis, and not only a movement pattern, right? Because you're buoyant and floating in a body of water. We like to assume, whether rightfully or wrongfully, that most of their conditioning work is being elicited within the pool itself. The style of training that we have at practice is fairly high yardage, even for our sprint group. And so we know that the conditioning aspect is going to be essentially taken care of for most of our student athletes in terms of what their actual distances are for their particular events, whether, again, sprinter or mid distance or a long distance swimmer. They are going to be accumulating significant amount of yardage year round, just because that's the way that our group particularly trains. And so my job for them is a little bit different in the sense that our training within the weight room will continue to elicit a lot of essentially what our soccer programs are doing in a sense of we do a lot of different movements. We'll do significantly less amount of single leg movements and single leg plyometrics, but we will do a significantly large amount of split stance variations, because that's how they're coming off the block, and that's also how they're hitting a turn if we're on a short course 25-meter lap. And so we are trying to elicit maximal power kind of endurance with that group, in the sense that it's a very specific position that is constantly repeated within the pool. And so how can we load it and potentially change some of the dynamics of it, whether it's a repeated effort where we have, like for us, we utilize a dumbbell jump a lot with that group, where it's immediate eccentric land followed by an immediate concentric out. And so we'll do upwards of anywhere from 5 to 8 reps on that and elicit a longer form of kind of this power output. And we'll do that both legs parallel, split stand positions with the right leg dominant and the left leg dominant. We'll do a number of variations from split stance elevated, what's the word I'm looking for? We call it a single leg elevated jump. And so that'd be like an 18-inch box for most of our team, with the one leg leading and pushing out of that as high as they can off the box, and then immediately landing and re-going. But essentially what we try and do is be at practice, be at competitions as much as possible, to see what the positions actually are within coming off the block versus off the turn. And so then we're trying to find movements that we can elicit a maximal power output that we can load within the weight room. And actually, interestingly enough, we started to really apply a lot of accommodating resistance protocols with that team as well, because of the resistance from the water coming off the turn is a little bit kind of like you're fighting against it before you get into your rhythm. So that's something that we've elicited from whether a split stance squat within a rack with chains on a bar, or even a double leg bilateral squat, whether front squat or back squat, in the sense that we'll add that kind of as we get closer to season. And then we also look at position dominance as well. And so we'll do full range of motion work leading up to the season. And as we get into the season, we'll move more to a half squat or a quarter squat basis, just because we know they're not really getting into that full depth position as much as possible. And we can load it significantly heavier. And our athletes have seemed to respond to that really, really well. So from a conditioning aspect, I'll be honest, we don't really touch on it too much because of the way that we particularly train at this institution, and that the yardage is significantly higher. But all the power endurance aspects really remain consistent, whether a sprinter or a long distance swimmer for us.
Nice. So again, taking another step, and how does that then march over to the sprint field, the track and field side of things? So the way I've kind of took what you're saying is, like, obviously you've got your long distance, your soccer, you've got like your not medium distance, but like different type of conditioning and workout that happens, and then obviously you've got your more explosive, high energy demands, more oxygen, needs a bit less time to recover. How does that then transfer over to the track and field side?
Yeah, I mean, our track team here, cross country, we consider different because they have their own timelines and their own sports, and so their training's a little different than the particular group that I work with. But when it comes to our jumpers and sprinters, kind of longest distance there for us is probably going to be pushing to that 400 meter range, which is obviously oxidative and glycolytic together, but probably more glycolytic and phosphagen really early on. And so for us, when we look at what those energy systems are, again, a lot of what is happening within the training program happens within the practice setting. Now, the big difference for us is within our tempo in the weight room. So both our swim programs and our soccer programs will move at a significantly higher tempo, because that is how they're performing within their given competition surface, if you will. Now, some of our sprinting swimmers will have a little bit more rest time because the demands are a little bit different. But for a majority of our teams on those ends where it is oxidative, we're going to move at a really high tempo. Particular track and field programs, when it comes to our multis, our jumps and our sprints, essentially we're working off of, a 1 to 15 or a 1 to 20 work to rest ratio, where it's not as fast as possible. We are taking time in between our rep schemes. We're taking time in between our sets, whether that's cluster work or true on the clock. What did the sets look like to elicit as, I wouldn't say as close to competition standard as possible, because every competition is different and it depends on how big the heat is, right? If you have 20 people in your heat, you may be waiting for 5 minutes. If you only had 9 people in a finals, it could be 2 to 5 minutes between your next attempt, depending on what that particular group is. Obviously, if you're a sprinter, you may be waiting day from semifinals to finals, could be a full day in between. But ultimately, their reps in practice probably mimic similarly to what we're trying to do from what the phosphagen output is of, I would say I think our textbook says 1 to 20 work to rest ratio. And so we're trying to elicit a similar adaptation where we're really only working on that maximum power output between sets. And so we give them about a 1 to 2 minute rest, depending on how long the set was for those specific movements. It's a lot simpler in the way that we train. We will do some sport specific movements, such as a penultimate kind of lunge series, whether loaded or unloaded. But ultimately, we're focusing on the fundamental Olympic based movements with snatch, clean. We will squat to full depth early on and then move to a quarter later. And that's more of a coach kind of that's what they prefer for their training systems. We've been fortunate to not have a large amount of soft tissue injuries, but I think that comes down to what's happening at practice because they're so well adapted to what those demands are. But yeah, we change the tempo up a lot. Movement wise is always geared towards kind of that maximal power output and strength. We're not looking to necessarily develop a significant amount of hypertrophy for that group or for even our swim group, where we need a little bit more body fat percentage in comparison to our kind of lean body mass. We know that body fat percentage in the pool does help you stay buoyant up to a certain point. Obviously, we don't want to get too out of whack with what the composition looks like. But for our track and field groups, it's all tempo based and oriented around what's going to provide the best output for you to match your practice setting, because the practice setting is going to be best geared to match competition setting. And so whatever we can do to help you have the best practice possible is going to allow you to have the best competition possible. So very slight change. I would say less technical movements overall in terms of what we're asking them to do, but significantly more intensity with those particular groups because they are eliciting a maximal effort, I guess you could say, event multiple times during their competition phases. Whereas depending on your position in soccer, you may never reach maximal speed, right? You could never get there. And so it's just a little bit of a different mindset in terms of our volume and intensity percentages and how we're rolling off things.
100%. That's where I was kind of like going with it, and you explained it so well, and like the different sort of styles that are implemented between both. I was wondering if you could go back to something that you said about the cluster sets and how you're using them and why.
Yeah, so it's interesting. We think of it as if we're going to accumulate fatigue throughout a set, it has to make sense. And again, I think for track and field, it can and cannot make sense depending on what you're trying to elicit. So for us, the cluster, based on the research that we've seen, obviously allows us to kind of allow the energy systems to regain some ATP, whether it's a lot or not at all. Sometimes it doesn't feel like that much recovery basis, but we're typically operating off of a 15-second to a 25-second cluster set to just allow for some of that immediate recovery to happen because we are at some higher percentages. And while we could push through those percentages under a constant rep kind of management of if we have 5 sets of 3 that you're doing 3 in a row versus 5 sets of 3 with a 15 to 25 second kind of cluster implementation off the tempo, it just allows the athlete to kind of reset, in our opinion, and also provide a higher intent and increase their output because they do have a little bit of that kind of recovery aspect within the sets. And again, I do think that can work for a variety of sports, particularly for us. We just find that it has the most value with these because there is so much rest between specific movements within a practice set. Even if, I was at practice the other day and I saw some repeat 10-meter sprints or some 10-meter accelerations, if you will, where it was kind of, we have to get through a certain number of 10-meter accelerations in a specific amount of time, but there is a rest component implemented between each rep. That's pretty similar to what a cluster is for me in terms of what the timeline is. A 10-meter sprint for us is probably anywhere from between 1 and 2 seconds, maybe a little bit shorter depending on how fast you are. But ultimately, that could be a rep for us. Obviously, some reps at a higher intensity may take a little bit longer, but even when we start pushing that to 20, 30 meters with that rest in between of about 15 to 25 seconds that we're seeing elicit at practice, it really meets the same energy demands and also the same muscular output that we're trying to meet for the needs of that practice component, which, again, if I'm trying to elicit you to have the best practice possible so your coaches can turn that practice into the best competition as possible. I think meeting those demands is incredibly important. And for us, it's just elicited a lot of really great feedback from our students as well, because they feel like, we are pushing into those high 80s, low 90%, that they have the ability to kind of reset mentally, which is very track oriented in the sense that it's you versus your implement, or it's you versus your lane. And so when you can kind of continue to train that kind of mental aspect of what the sport is as well, I think it does help transfer over.
Yeah. To go back to some of the things that you were saying about the soccer, obviously you mentioned that during preseason or that off-season period, you obviously don't, like, you're kind of expecting things to drop off and jumping not to be the same height, performance, and a little bit more of fatigue accumulation. How do you explain that to them in terms of, okay, we're still going to test, we're still going to figure out what's happening, but we're not essentially, we know that's going to happen, we do care, but again, we're not really going to change anything because of it.
Yeah, so again, that protocol changes in the sense that in season, we will test before every lift for our jumps, and we will train on a average week twice a week. We do match day -2 for both days. So if we have a Thursday, Sunday game, we'll lift on a Tuesday and we'll lift on a Friday. That Friday lift is obviously significantly different than our Tuesday lift. It's a little bit more what we consider like kind of a regen metabolic activity day, where everything is, there's really no major compound movements with it. It's more hitting auxiliary pieces that we need to kind of elicit health overall, but a lot of times they're coming off of travel, so we just want to get them moving. That original Tuesday lift, the first match day -2 versus the match day +1 going into the Sunday game, is a lot more of our compound stuff. But when we test on both those days, we have the educational piece with how we talk to our athletes. Obviously, we are probably expecting this Tuesday jump pre-lift to be higher than the Friday jump, just because we're coming off a significant game load there and we haven't had a day off yet. And so that first day coming off a day off allows us to typically have a lot better recovery from a sleep perspective, and also a regrouping on the nutrition and hydration perspective coming off a Sunday game that allows us to have a little bit more output. But the off season and the way that we explain that is significantly different in that we will only test on the first lift of the week. We won't test every day, because we know that the accumulation of that fatigue based on us training now 3 times a week, adding in speed and agility sessions, adding in a conditioning session on top of your practice versus just having the weight room followed by practice and game in the in-season, is going to accumulate a lot more. And so coming off of that weekend of hopefully some off days, we know that that's going to be them at their least fatigue point. And so we try to set them up for success in the sense that we'll only test on that first lift, because typically that first lift has occurred before we've done any other. We may have a speed session outside before that, but that speed session in terms of yardage is typically not that high. And so we think that we can still get a relatively accurate jump height, even though they are coming off of some work from a field-based session. But then we won't test it for the rest of the week. And so we explain to them, we'll go through what our intensities look like throughout the week. It seems like a lot to be telling a student athlete at this particular level, but we'll literally go through what a 2 meso cycle will look like for us from 8 weeks. And so we will walk them through kind of where the intensity is building, where our deload weeks are, followed by a revamp, if you will. And so over that 8-week period, here's when we expect you to have the highest jump height. And here's where we expect to see some fall off. And that shouldn't scare you in terms of where we're at. And it shouldn't make you feel worried about where your performance aspects are. We are expecting that to happen too. So we'll actually take out our whiteboard and within 3 minutes have it drawn out, show them exactly where we think from a weekly perspective we think they'll be based on our yearly member numbers, and looking back year to year of what we've seen our traditional trends be, and say, even if you're not at these areas, or you're not jumping at your highs at this time frame, do not think that means that you're not performing at a high enough standard for us. We do a great job of meeting with those students and making sure they understand what all the variables are that can have an impact on stress, right? We're still in school as well. So you have midweeks or midterms, you have finals weeks that have a significant amount of stress. Sometimes someone has a big test that you may not know about because everyone's in a sort of a different major. And so we take all those things into consideration. We make sure that they understand that stress on the body is stress on the body, whether it's positive or negative stress, whether it's an exciting thing that's happening, it can still be an internal load for you from a stress perspective. And that's going to affect us, all of us, right? Like we can't get away from that. And so we just do a great job, I think, of explaining in the most simple and layman terms of what we expect to see, how they're going to be feeling, what days are going to be really, really tough, what weeks are going to be really, really tough, when they're going to be able to find that rebound, and that we understand that there's outside life stressors that are obviously going to impact who they are on that day and how they feel on that day, not only physiologically, but mentally. And so we do such a great job of our education piece that I think it sets us up for the best success, and that when your athletes know what's coming, they can better prepare for it. And so we will tell them this week is like, next week's not going to be fun. And it's not going to be fun in the sense it's going to hurt. You're going to be sore. You're going to be tired, but we're going to take care of you the following week after that. And when you at least prepare them for what that is, they respond better. And then when we come back, they typically do feel better knowing, hey, this is going to be a down week, and we get to kind of, go back to the 60% or maybe 70% intensity versus our these are high 70s, depending on how we're working or where we're at within our off-season training. That it allows them to perform a little bit better on those testing metrics, because in their mind they're like, oh, this is my week to go. And so they've typically done a little bit more, from sleeping better to probably eating better and hydrating a little bit better, because they know that we're going to actually be testing on those particular days.
Yeah, and you've just kind of touched it, but I want to highlight it a little bit more. You talk about the educational pieces that you give them. What sort of recovery systems are you implementing with them? Say, hey, we're on a 80 to 85 or 70 to 75, 80% week. Obviously, you're going to be fatigued. This is some strategies that we want you to implement to sort of try and combat some of those longer lasting effects from it.
Yeah, we're incredibly fortunate in that we have a significant amount of resources at the institution I'm at. We have a fantastic athletic training room with all the individuals that work within that room being incredibly awesome at their job. And so for us, we also have a head coach, both head coaches that are for those particular teams that are really in tune with understanding what it feels like to be in those situations, and to allow the student athletes to do what they need to do to recover. So for us, we'll do some implementation within our weight room, where we may come in and adjust a day to potentially end short to foam roll, lacrosse ball, maybe do some extended mobility pieces at the end of a training session, versus, if I need to cut a block to do that so that we can feel better the next day, I'll do that sometimes. But ultimately, we have cold tubs, hot tubs, contrast, cryo, we have hyper ice, we have Normatec boots, we have the best athletic training staff in the world, in my opinion. I love our counterparts and who we work with. I think they're really fantastic. The modalities that we have, from massage therapy to just getting worked with an athletic training staff member for a different number of modalities, whether it's cupping or needling or whatever it may be, it really allows us to effectively create the best overall protocol. And I think a lot of that is also individual based. So like for me particularly, I never wanted to be in the athletic training room from a recovery aspect. I wanted to do my own things. And so what we try and do is provide the best context and the best of both worlds. We've also sent out packets before with, 20 different YouTube videos of, here's some recovery modalities, whether it's some light active yoga or some different mobility things that you can work through, some, hey, if you're feeling tight in your hips today, here's a 10-minute hip protocol that you can work through, or any number of things like that from a recovery aspect. So we're trying to hit them at all different bases. What can we do in the weight room? What can we do from the athletic training perspective? What can we do to have them do things on their own? But then we also have a fantastic dietitian staff as well, that will have individual consults with various team members based on need to elicit the best nutritional aspects that they can possibly have. We have mental health staff that help them work through things as well from a counseling perspective on if you're going through something. So I really think that we're incredibly fortunate. Obviously, not every institution has that. And so it's hard to really speak to the different resources that lie within the American collegiate setting, because there is some vast disparities between division levels and even within conferences and institution to institution. But ultimately for us, we are trying to think about it from the athlete perspective and where the total load is. We are trying to look at the academic calendar to figure out when midterms are, to figure out when finals are for our students, and try and plan those weeks around our deload weeks, because we want them to be successful in their academic endeavors as well. So we try to look at the whole picture, provide them with the most resources as possible, but at the end of the day, it's their job to utilize those resources and take the most out of them of what they can. And we put the onus on them to do that, and they do a fantastic job of it.
Nice. A recent topic that we've been sort of getting into, and you've sort of touched on it. How do you sort of go from the PT to the S&C? Like, where is that line for you to take over from one another?
Yeah, so I'm a big scope of practice person. And again, I have fantastic relationship with our athletic training staff. So I really leave that up to them to tell me when they want me to be involved. And so for us, we have a PT, we have our athletic trainers, and then we have myself. And so a lot of times, depending on if it's a severe injury, they will obviously start with the doctors and then moving towards kind of what their limitations are. Athletic trainers will help work them through that, and then they'll eventually graduate to essentially our PT, who will then work on developing a lot of that starting strength. And a lot of times when they're done with kind of that PT work and they transition back into the athletic training hands, which again they're both working in unison together the whole time, but when they really focus back onto, hey, you've graduated from these very, very specific movements to a general athletic training kind of modality and mobility approach, that's typically when I'll jump into the process. But again, I want to be invited into that. I don't feel like I should overstep my role. And again, that comes from building those relationships to the best of my abilities, to the point where they feel comfortable inviting me in whenever they need me. And so sometimes that's really, really early on, depending on what the particular issue is. And sometimes it's, it can take a little bit of time, again, depending on the severity of that. But ultimately, we have a systematic approach on working back to return to play. That's a lot of why we're utilizing our benchmarking numbers on it, and we test at the beginning of every semester so that we can have baseline numbers of where we need to get back to. But it's a case-by-case basis. Ultimately, when we've gotten to a point where we are comfortable putting whatever extremity that was affected through the full range of motion, based on varying intensities, that's typically when I'll come in and offer some feedback and also program for a particular athlete regarding where they need to be and where we're trying to go. And so a lot of our athletic trainers are versed in some type of periodization, but I like to think I'm pretty good at that, and that's why I have my job. And so from a periodization standpoint, we do a lot of work on that end in terms of where the percentage of build is week to week versus, I operate off of 3% jumps or 6% jumps, and for certain injuries that could be different depending on where we're going to go. But ultimately, a lot of them end up on the 3% jumps, and we'll either do a 2 up, 1 down, 1 up model. So if we're looking at a mesocycle, and I call them different things, but if we had a base week, a load week, a deload, and then a super load, that's what we consider kind of a typical mesocycle for how we utilize it. However, we will also use a traditional mesocycle of a base load, super load, deload sort of methodology as well. And so it just depends on where the injury is. A lot of the periodization, I think, comes from collaboration working with our athletic training department. But ultimately in America, they have the final say in everything that gets done with our student athletes because of how the NCAA legislation works out. So it's my job to help facilitate them as much as I can. And when they need help, they let me know.
Yeah, that's sick. I always love when programs really put an emphasis on the collaboration of departments, and I think like the UFCPI does it the best. Like, they will literally like punt athletes to whatever department that they think, and they've created the whole protocols around this. But like it just runs so much smoother when everyone's on board with the same mission.
Yeah, we've been, again, really, really, really fortunate in that we have great individuals that work at our institution, and we're all kind of part of the same common goal, and they're right across the room from us. So our weight room is literally almost connected to our athletic training room. So it helps in the relationship building between us, but then also our student athletes get to see that we're connected and we know what's going on. And sometimes I'll know about something before the student even tells me, or they get off the practice field. And so when they come in, I'll be like, hey, what about this? And they're like, how do you already know? It's like, that's our job to know. So yeah, really, really fortunate in how we've been able to build our department, and really a lot of our guidelines have been built with each other and making sure that everyone's aware of what our protocols are. And that way we're always on the same page when it comes to what that return to play looks like, and then where everyone should lie in terms of when you need specific help in different areas. And so we try to help as much as we can across the board. That's really been the most effective for making sure our student athletes get back on a timely manner, but also in the healthiest possible position.
Yeah. In terms of the soccer side of it, obviously a lot of it is played on artificial grass, and there is a significant link to ACLs and more injury type based around the knee and ankle because of that surface. How are you sort of combating some mitigation protocols to make sure that it doesn't happen? As again, you can't reduce it, you can't protect it, but you can at least pad things along.
Yeah, so for us, again, we're incredibly fortunate in this regard as well that we only pretty much utilize grass fields. Occasionally we'll be on
Okay.
We'll occasionally be on a turf setting, and so that's obviously it's a different feeling in terms of how the stud is actually connecting with the surface, right? There's a little bit more give to the natural grass, and so our main practice field and our game field are both real grass, but we still do a number of things to kind of mitigate this. And so for us, again, that really centers around strengthening the knee through every plane and really dynamic movement that we can. And so that's really reflective in our weight room protocol, but also in our agility and change of direction protocol, in the sense that we will do any number of split stance variations, single leg variations, double leg variations through every plane that we can throughout those particular movements. And so that could be lateral, reverse, curtsy lunge, forward lunge, transverse lunge, a step up, a lateral step up, again, bilateral squat to a split stance squat, whether that's barbell loaded, dumbbell loaded, kettlebell loaded. Do we have band tension? Do we have chains? We'll utilize every modality specifically structured around the knee, and every plane and motion that we can do specifically structured around the knee, ankle, and hip to elicit their body to move within those positions as much as we can. We will do various different jumps and plyometrics. Again, we do a lateral bound to a single leg box jump, which we think elicits a significant amount of intensity within a single leg movement, and also happening in a lateral fashion that is going to happen within a game setting. So we're trying to do everything we can in the weight room to prepare the knee essentially for the demands that are going to be met. And we're going to try and do it under a significant amount of load at the appropriate time. Like, we're not doing that right before a game. We're not trying to fatigue it right before a game so they can go out and something happen. But we try to do those particular key movements year round when we can at the appropriate time. And for us, that's usually match day -2 from game, again, for a lot of those pieces. And that may be full intent, maximal effort plyometrics. It may even be a week where we say, hey, we're going to go at an 80% effort on these particular plyos that are happening in different various planes, just to bolster the tendon, ligaments, and muscular structure surrounding that particular area. As we get into the agility and change of direction, again, we are trying to turn, explode, and adapt to this particular stimulus in every plane and range of motion as possible as well. So for us, the way that we really combated that is preparing the knee to do the demands of the sport, whether that's a single leg jump or going from a double leg to a single leg approach, or a 3-step approach jump if you're coming off of a set piece, or whatever it is. We are going to implement very, I wouldn't say sport specific movements, but physiologically specific movements to help protect and bolster our athletes as much as we can. As you mentioned, I don't believe that you can prevent anything, because sports are unpredictable and there's so many things that go into what can cause an injury, but we're trying to bolster our athletes and protect them as much as we can in terms of what we're asking them to do so that they're prepared for it when they need to do it.
100%. And again, I think there's been quite a lot on this recently on social media, and it's like, how do we prevent injuries? And like, a lot of people claiming that they can predict if an injury is going to happen or not. So it's one of those that obviously it's a sensitive subject, because like, injuries do take a lot out of the athletes. But then it's like, how can we protect them the best way possible so that even if it does happen, like, they have some foundation strength already in that joint to be able to come back a little bit quicker. And I think that's the most that we can do, is like, how can we build some solid foundations there to protect from anything after the fact?
Yeah. I think we do a particularly good job about that particular aspect of, again, the more we can bolster the entire body, the better we're going to be at the end of the day. But also, we do a great job of communicating with our athletes and allowing them to have some voice. It is their body, and we think that they should have some say in what their training looks like. So ultimately, if we have someone that may have had an injury in the past that's kind of acting up on them, we'll have that discussion and adjust the movement that may be irritating them, but still trying to work that modality at the same aspect of, like, if this particular plane isn't working for us today, what can we do to adjust that so that we're not overloading and fatiguing that particular kind of trigger area moving forward? And so it's not a set in stone thing. We're constantly adjusting, we're constantly evaluating, constantly working with our student athletes to, again, listen to them and try and understand where they're coming from as much as possible to create a program that works for them just as much as it works for us.
I think as well, like, when we're talking about athlete development and programming, I think this is actually one of the main reasons me and Kenn connected, was that I had put a story up being like, how do you Like, so let's take the NSCA, UKSCA, for example. You attend these conferences and you learn like some more tools for the toolbox. How do you then turn that into being part of your program? So obviously there's a testing phase for you, and this is where me and kind of really connected. Was like, if we learn something, we have to then apply on ourselves. After we apply on ourselves, how does it then trickle into our program? From season to season, that can also look different. A head coach wants them to attack more aggressively next year. Okay, more conditioning, more time on feet, more strength, power, like a whole host of things. How do you go around like implementing new things to your program? How's that testing phase for you?
Yeah, I mean, I train almost 6 times a week. I do a number of conditioning sessions myself. I train a lot within the weight room setting, obviously. When I enjoy it, I wouldn't be doing this if I didn't enjoy it. But I also like to, we have a decent intern base here in terms of who we've had as a part of our training staff. And so we'll allow the interns to kind of play around with these ideas as well and say, hey, we brought this back from the conference. What are some different ways? And we'll workshop it as an entire staff, whether through our assistants and our interns are all together as one group, or maybe particularly setting it off on certain individuals of, I need you to test through these movements. We're going to report back as a group. And so I really love shared ownership of ideas. And so if we can continue to propagate as much education as possible, we try to have kind of these breakdowns of someone's coming back from a conference on what they learned and what we can help implement. But at the end of the day, you're going to learn a lot of things at conferences. And, you know, I heard someone say at our last national convention, if I can't use it on Monday, I might as well not write it down. And I think that there's a little bit of merit to that in the sense that if you do not have the resources to do something, you can't implement something that someone with the most resources is doing if you have none. And so you have to find unique and creative ways to potentially take these ideas that you've learned, figure out how to implement them within your staff first and how they're training and how you may be training, to figure out what that actually feels like and understand what that implementation is going to do for a student athlete. And then you can slowly work it in on a case-by-case basis. I would say for us, me specifically, in the way that I internalize different tools is that if I'm coming back from a conference and there's a new idea that I just heard of that I think is really, really awesome and I want to implement it, what we will do is either I will test it out first and then we'll begin a build up into the implementation, or we'll have, again, the staff and interns kind of build it up and figure out how we can essentially make it fit our model best. But ultimately, I'm never just going to throw something out there at a full effort intensity type of thing. And so a lot of what that looks like for us is, hey, we're going to try this particular movement or this particular kind of ideology in a very controlled setting, always in the off season, always at not maximal intensity, and then get immediate feedback from our student athletes based on what that feel is like and if they enjoyed it or didn't enjoy it. And then we will kind of track that through a number of training sessions, because oftentimes when we change things, the initial reaction is to not like it. And so we try to give some time for student athletes to, one, not only understand what that particular protocol is or that particular movement or modality is, but then also get used to it before they decide if they want to keep it or not. But it's always happening in the off season, in a controlled setting, in a volume and intensity base or whatever it may be that we feel is not going to be detrimental to the student athletes, and then through that phase of building through it and getting a little bit more touch points, and doing it more than once, we get the feedback of whether we should keep it or not. And so some student athletes, as we've brought things in, are like, oh, I love that, I want to do that. Others are like, no, I don't want to do it. And then it's like, okay, well, I'll just program it for you and not for you. If you think it's going to make you better, let's do it. If you don't, then we won't do it. And so we do a significant more amount of student athlete autonomy for particular groups than I think maybe some other institutions do, but we just think that ultimately they know what's going to make them feel best when they compete, and we want them to feel the best when they compete.
Yeah, I love that. How important does then the staff collaboration sessions become when you are, obviously everyone will have different interests and everyone will want to bring new ideas into it?
Yeah, I think that's what you want. I don't think you want a bunch of people that think like you in the room. I think you want a bunch of people that can work really, really well together. You can develop a really awesome community of individuals who are set around a common goal and that want to accomplish the same thing. But at the end of the day, I don't want 3 people that think like me. I want three people that think completely different of the way I think, because then they're going to be able to bring in new ideas that maybe I haven't even considered because it's not even something that I'm interested in. And so having that diversity of ideology and training methods and philosophy is really important in staff collaboration, because it allows you to think outside of the box. And it allows information to get to you that you wouldn't otherwise have seen because it's never on your radar and it's not in your algorithm on IG. And so how you can develop that is by finding people that complement you best. And frankly, that's how I've gotten better at conditioning over time. Like, I was a thrower in college, and typically they're not doing a lot of conditioning in a traditional sense. And so, right, like my big things were, I thought I was a really great programmer. I thought I was really great at periodization. I thought I was really great at power and strength. And so by surrounding myself with individuals that came from different backgrounds, whether conditioning backgrounds or, maybe work through a little bit more of an agility setting, you're able to adapt and grow and learn. And if you're not surrounding yourself with like and different minded people that you can work really well with, you're just going to be stagnant in a sense, unless you're going out there and finding topics that don't interest you, which I don't think a lot of people are doing that.
100%. I always forget who said this, but I read something where it was along the lines of there's a company, the multi-billionaire company, when they have these staff meetings, they go in order of least experience to most experience.
Yeah.
So they allow the newer people to come in first, give their point without having that thought of like, I better not speak because the CEOs just went and someone else. And what you're saying kind of fits into that, where everyone's got different opinions, everyone's got that ability to be listened to and change and adapt how the system is going to work from then on.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting idea. And a lot of that works really well too, because if you've been somewhere for 27 years,
JD,
you know why things are the way they are. You understand the different pathways in which you got to where your standards are at, and versus someone who's maybe only been there for a few months is going to have a lot of questions. And sometimes they're asking questions that you haven't thought about in a while of why something is operating the way that it is. And so it really is important to allow those new voices to ask questions, because then it helps you reevaluate how you got there in the first place. And also, if it's something that can't be changed, or it's just the way that things are going to have to be based on whatever is there, now you're getting the chance to educate someone on why something's the way it is. But it's an incredibly important part of how we operate, in the sense that when we bring in someone new to our staff, we ensure that, one, they're going to fit our community and what we're trying to accomplish, but also that they're going to be introspective and try and be like, hey, why are we doing it this way? Can you explain it to us? Because then it allows us to reevaluate and be like, why are we doing it that way, versus being stuck in a particular, methodology of the way we're doing things. So yeah, I think both those things are incredibly important. The shared ideas, again, shared ownership. We allow our staff to have a full say in kind of what our overall mission and philosophy is as a whole. And I think that's important too, because then you can create a little bit more buy-in within your staff.
100%. That's awesome. What is one piece of advice that you would give new coaches or coaches wanting to become part of this industry?
Coach as much as two different things. If you're already a coach, be as confident as possible. I don't think that there's anything that helps you sell yourself more than being confident in what you're doing. And whether it's the most cutting edge modalities or equipment or whatever it is, great. If you have no resources at all and you only have a barbell and a couple of plates, just be the most confident person you could possibly be, because I think that really echoes to other people who are watching you, but it also helps you feel better about yourself as an individual and a coach. And it also makes your training better, and your student athletes will recognize that. If you are trying to get into the field, you have to coach as much as possible, in whatever setting that is, whether it's K through 12 or high school or, the college setting or the pro setting, whatever it is. Like, you have to coach as much as you can to help build that confidence. I think that's kind of the number one trait for individuals who are particularly successful in this field. Even if you feel like you're getting paid not enough, which I know a lot of individuals in this field are in that situation where you are probably being underpaid. And so how can you push that forward is not going to be by not feeling great about yourself. If you feel great about yourself and you're really confident in what you're doing and you're trying to build that confidence in all ways, you're going to find unique and innovative ways to be successful, and hopefully find positions that are financially stable and also familially stable, and that your family is happy. And that also, again, student athletes are going to react to that confidence differently than they will if you are not. So coach as much as you possibly can. Be as confident as possible, and oftentimes that'll lead to really great things.
I'm going to piggyback off your point one on the confidence element of it. And there's kind of two parts to this. One is have the confidence of a toddler. Like
Yeah.
when I'm teaching someone to, again, two different aspects, but if someone's not confident about something, I'm like, okay, have the confidence of a toddler for a couple seconds, just like
Yeah.
act like a toddler, just go for it, see what happens. If that doesn't work, I often go back to a thing. It's a psychology thing, but it's like, what in your life makes you the most confident, and then apply it
Yeah.
to whatever you're going into. So I had this one client who, she was very shy in the weight room, and my thing is like, I want attack. Like I always want you to attack. I want intent. I want like an attack to be there. Um, but she just wasn't on that for that time being. So I was like, okay, what in life makes you confident? Like your whole life, you've got your whole life to pick from. She's like, oh, I play the piano really well. I'm like, sick. So as you approach that bar, you're getting ready to play the piano. How does that look like? So that was the only instructions I
Yeah.
gave her. As soon as she approached the bar, she was like, she postured up, shoulders pinned back, and I was like, fucking yes. Let's go. So
Yeah.
from there, I was just like, so from now on, like any lift that you approach, you're going to think you're about to play the piano. And that's all I want you to think about. The lift isn't significant. You're about to approach playing the piano. Let's go. She got it straight away from there. And it's like, and you've kind of touched it. It's like kind of bringing in these experiences, these, again, EQ stuff that you learn from coaching a lot, that you can then bring into these different areas of real life coaching scenarios.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that example. We've had one of those before where, maybe a student athlete wasn't particularly confident in what we were doing, and it was just like, hey, you're here for a reason. Like you're on this team because we believe that you were able to do this. You got to believe it too. Like, and then there was a real shift in our mindset of how we started approaching. So it's amazing what that can do for you, not only in how you're approaching your student athletes, but also or your clients or whatever it may be, but also in terms of how you're going to be coaching and the intent with you, which you're going to coach as well. So it's really awesome.
And my second point that I'm kind of wanted to piggyback off is, as a coach, and you kind of mentioned the disparity in funding and equipment, and I always like to say you're as limited as your imagination, right? If you don't have a sled pool, but you've got some like those step boxes that you have like in old school fitness videos. If you've got one of those, a couple kettlebells and a belt rope, guess what? You can tie it all together and pull it. I've done that a couple times where I was at a gym that just had nothing, just had bare minimum. So I was like, okay, I need this to be in it. I need a pulling action. What can I do? Put that together. Limited as your imagination.
No, that's awesome.
No, that I appreciate you so much for coming on today, Peter.
Yeah, absolutely.
This has been a long time coming, but I really do appreciate you coming on.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me. It's been a pleasure, and hopefully someone will get something out of this.
Appreciate it. If you can let people know where they can find you and sort of reach out to you as well.
Yeah, I'm pretty simple. I'll be on IG a lot, so my IG handle is PeterKenn1. And then also my Gmail is the same thing. So it's peterkenn1@gmail.com. If you have any questions about anything or you want to shoot off a DM and just ask questions, I'm happy to hop on a call with anyone. I try to answer every email and answer every text and answer every DM. So happy to be a service to others and happy to provide context on anything that we talked about today that you may want more context on.
Love it. I appreciate you.